My name is Jen, and today we're going to talk about everything that I read in October. So over the course of October I read like 7 books, and this was honestly not what I was planning on reading in October. If you saw my fall TBR, I actually had a lot more plans for October in general, or well, the fall reading in general. I had more plans, and then they just didn't really work out the way that I wanted. I had a lot more than I wanted to read. Anyway, what I did end up reading were somewhat spooky-ish books, but not exactly. I guess to start with, we'll talk about the series that I did a reread of, which is a children's horror series, or I'm gonna count it as horror because I think it was kind of meant to be horror, but it's not like remotely scary. Horror comedy, maybe, I suppose. That is the Bunnicula series. So these are books that I have loved since I was a little kid. I want to say the first time I read the first book, first or second grade, I want to say. Then we get into book 2, and I'm not 100% sure. The edition that I have was printed in, it doesn't say. It just tells me the original date of print, which was 1982. That is not what this book is from. I'm fairly certain this edition is from the 90s. I was not around in 1982. And I'm gonna say that I got this and the subsequent other books probably at the Scholastic Book Fair. Anyway, this series starts with Bunnicula, A Rabbit Tale of Mystery by Deborah and James Howe, and the illustrations are by Alan Daniel. This is following Harold the dog. He is actually telling the story. It starts out with a letter from the editor, and it's the editor explaining when he first got a hold of the manuscript of this book, and it was right around closing time. There was a scratching at the front door of his office. He opened up, and there was a big old dog carrying an envelope in his mouth. The envelope contained an introductory letter and this manuscript. So the book itself is written, the books, all of them, are supposed to be written by Harold the dog. And it's really fun. The editor's note is a really great part of it, because it's like the introductory thing is building anticipation, because he's like, I was on the edge of my seat. This truly was a creepy tale kind of thing. Just building the anticipation for the child reader of, ooh, this might be kind of spooky. They're not that spooky. I can't remember if I was indeed scared of any of this when I was a little kid. I was a really big coward as a child, so I don't know, but I did really love this series. So like I said, it's written by Harold the dog, and it details what happened in his household. Mr. and Mrs. X, who he has renamed in these books as the Monroe family. He lives a pretty comfortable life with the Monroes, Mr. and Mrs. Monroe. Mr. Monroe is a professor at the local university. I can't quite remember what Mrs. Monroe does, but she also has a really important job. And then they have 2 boys, Pete and Toby. Pete is a pain in the ass, and he's a pain in the ass from book 1 until the end. Toby is the younger of the boys, and he can also be kind of a pain, but he's also more sensitive. He's well read. He's kind to the animals in the house. And the other occupant of the house is Chester the cat, who is very strange, as cats are usually. This details what happened when their peaceful life at home was turned upside down by the sudden arrival of a tiny bunny called Bunnicula. Bunnicula is found randomly at the movie theater when the Monroes went to a showing of the original 1931 Dracula, and while there they discovered that on one of the seats was a shoebox full of dirt and this bunny who looks kind of like he might have a little bit of a vampire cape on. And Chester is suspicious of this rabbit from go. Harold is like, oh, what a sweet little guy kind of thing. And mysterious things start happening around the house. The vegetables are suddenly found completely white and discarded, drained of all juices. There's tiny little bite marks in them, and Chester goes off the rails, saying that Bunnicula is obviously a vampire bunny, and today is vegetables, tomorrow it's the world. You know, just paranoia. And it's about Harold, like, just kind of along for the ride, documenting everything, having a lot of laughs, and also being like, yo, Chester, what the hell, it's a bunny rabbit. Shenanigans ensue, and that is the first volume, is the introductory of this. The second volume is Holiday Inn, and this is actually Sans Bunnicula. This is the Monroes are going away on a trip, and somebody else is taking care of Bunnicula, but they have decided to board Chester and Harold at Chateau Bow Wow, but Harold calls it Holiday Inn because there is a mysterious wire-haired dachshund couple staying also at the inn, and Chester is of course convinced that they are werewolves. Just strange goings on, very strange characters. I really like the tropes in here. It is a little bit different than this book really. The first book was by Deborah and James Howe, but I guess Deborah passed away, so the rest of the books are by James Howe. This one starts to take things at a different turn, I want to say. Not that much different, it's just, there's definitely some pulling of different tropes in media and things being pulled in. Like the characters in here are very much filling in roles that you might see in an Agatha Christie novel, or if not an Agatha Christie novel, maybe along the lines of like an episode of Murder, She Wrote. If Jessica Fletcher was away on vacation writing at a resort, and all the quirky characters she might meet, and then somebody gets killed or goes missing and she gets involved inevitably, and that kind of thing. It's very reminiscent of that, which I think that's something that's really great about these books, is that some of the jokes are so funny, and they're probably funny when you're a kid, but I think if you're reading this as an adult, like if you were a parent reading this with your child, or if you are namely me, revisiting childhood favorites and still cracking up at these jokes, I think they hit slightly different as an adult, because you can see the little tropes and things that have been pulled in are some jokes that maybe would have gone over your head when you were like 9, but not so much when you're in your 30s. Ridiculous shenanigans abound. Then we have The Celery Stalks at Midnight, Book 3. There's a new introduction of a new character, a dachshund puppy named Howie, and he is my favorite character. He is ridiculous. He has decided that Chester is his pop. He calls Harold the dog Uncle Harold, and he calls Chester the cat Pop, because he has decided that Chester is his father figure. Hilarious. And he is so funny. He is the purveyor of dad jokes. Terrible, terrible puns, terrible, terrible jokes. So great. And this volume is them all running around town trying to figure out what's going on, because all of a sudden Bunnicula is gone. He is missing from he is just gone, and they can't figure out what has happened. And Harold and Howie are kind of coming at this from a place of concern, and Chester's coming at this from a place of utmost paranoia, thinking, oh my god, he's loose, this is the end of the world, what if there's zombie vegetables? Because, you know, the other part of Dracula is, you know, it's not just that Dracula kills people, Dracula, like, then makes minions. What if these vegetables become his minions? It goes off the rails. And we have Nighty Nightmare, which sees again the main three, Harold, Chester, and Howie. Benicula again staying with someone, and they are off on a camping adventure in the woods with the Monroes, and they meet some very strange characters that Chester is again convinced are more than what they say they are, supernaturally minded. Then we have this volume, which the thing about this is that I thought, just when I was like, I had started this book originally, I was like, okay, I must have read this at some point in elementary school, because oftentimes there are books that I have copies of now that I read repeatedly in elementary school, but I never owned my own copy at the time. And I just assumed this is one of those cases, and maybe I got it out of the library, because over the first like couple of chapters I was like, these names are really familiar. And then I realized as I got further into the book that I had no idea what was going on. I did not remember any of this, and I remembered why some of the names are familiar. Because this is Return to Holiday Inn, and it is Harold, Chester, and Howie again being boarded at Chateau Bow Wow, or as Chester calls it, Holiday Inn, and they return here again, and they meet familiar faces that we knew from Holiday Inn, and that was why I was thinking that it sounded familiar, because I was recognizing a couple of characters who show up again. I had never read this before this time reading it, and that was pretty great to discover that there was another book in this series that I had not read, and I was pretty happy with it. I thought that it was very sweet. It actually made me tear up a little bit, and I feel like this one was more emotional than some of these other ones, and it's also such a laugh too, and really great. But yeah, there's that emotional payoff in here too, which was very sweet. And then we come to the final book, although I recently found out that I thought there was only 6 books in the series. There appears to maybe have been a 7th one, but I'm thinking I'm not going to read that one, just because 6 ends at such a perfect juncture that I feel like if I went and I picked up number 7, it would be kind of like how I feel about Toy Story 4. Toy Story 3 ended in such a perfect spot for my generation, say, and how much that we all care about the characters. And then Toy Story 4 feels like, well, that's just a cheap end of something, and it's a cash grab, and they're trying to go for the younger generations, and it's like, it's good for them because it's different, maybe? I don't know. That probably sounds really crappy, but that's just how I feel in example, and that's kind of how I feel about this series. Like, I feel like this is such a good ending, and this is where it needed to end, and maybe people who grew up with it, even though this series has been around a little bit longer than I have, maybe how people feel about this, like this final book. It is Benicula Strikes Again. You can see it's a hardcover because I'm pretty sure I got this when it came out, like when it first came out. And this came out, I want to say 1999, right? So I was at the age where I was just about starting to age out of chapter books that were this small, perhaps. So it really felt like the perfect ending. So yeah, I don't really feel the need to read number 7. But this, yeah, like I said, great ending overall, shenanigans all the way through some of that emotional bit. And I really loved the character growth of everyone in here, especially Chester. There is a part in this book that I mentioned it on Instagram, but if you don't follow me over there, I will bring it up again. Like, this is a series for kids, but I feel like it's very readable for anyone of any age, and this particular passage just really hits different as an adult than it did when I was probably like 11, 12 years old. The world has a standard tradition that he has with Toby, the younger Monroe boy. On Friday nights, Toby is allowed to stay up as late as he wants, basically before he goes to bed. And he tends to stay up reading and eating junk food and hanging out with Harold. And Harold loves hanging out because Toby's his boy, and he loves reading with him, spending time with him, and he also loves the fact that Toby shares his chocolate cupcakes with him. So they hang out and do that, and on this particular occasion they've been reading through Sherlock Holmes. And this is not a spoiler because, frankly, the series is from the 1880s, 1890s. It's had several adaptations, including at least 2 that have referenced this particular volume of the books, and it's pretty much everybody knows about it, so it's not a spoiler to tell you that at some point in the series, Sherlock Holmes meets his arch-enemy Moriarty, and the two take a terrible tumble over some falls, and Watson basically presumes that both men have died in this, because how could anyone survive from that? Yeah, it's a thing. So Harold and Toby are reading this. Toby's obviously upset. This is, I mean, you would be if you're reading a book and you've grown fond of the characters. And Harold is also upset. It's kind of funny. It's like, I couldn't believe it. The other really done. He'd killed Sherlock Holmes. Which is hilarious because you should look up sometime the absolute craziness that went on publicly after Sir Arthur Conan Doyle tried to get rid of Holmes. There was public mourning. Like, men were going around wearing black crepe armbands or something for like the longest time because they were mourning the character. There was a public outcry. It was insane. He brought him back, obviously, but it was just crazy. Anytime you think somebody's gone absolutely nuts for book characters, just remember the time that the entirety of England went into public outraged mourning over Sherlock Holmes. So book fandoms have always been insane. But they are, obviously both of them are upset, and this causes Harold to reflect. And I don't remember this passage from reading this as a kid. I don't think I even remember this part from when I did a reread of the series like 4 or 5 years ago. There was something more here than a story. There was the painful recognition that all too quickly things can change. I didn't like it. I wanted my world to go on as it always had. I wanted to be sure that Friday nights would always mean treats with Toby, that Chester would always be my friend, that Bunnicula would always be in his cage by the living room window, and that Howie would always, for reasons no one understands, call me Uncle Harold and Chester Pop. And it's like, I don't know, I know this is a book for kids, but that shit just hits different. And I don't know, in a shitty year like I've had, it also hits different, so maybe it's me just having a time. But this is again one that's emotional. I think that it tries to be emotional in each of these books, even though most of it is not taking itself very seriously. It's hilarious. The jokes, there's such bad puns and dad jokes and plays on words and things. It's intelligent writing in here. It's not, I don't want to be like a book snob about kids' books and stuff like that, but I mean, I guess I'll use Captain Underpants as an example. Now don't get me wrong here, I have not read all of them, but I read up to volume 5 or 6, I want to say, when I was growing up, and I loved that series. That was hilarious, but it's very heavy on the kind of toilet humor, which is great, because like kids love that shit, adults love that shit, and it's very hilarious. But I think this series is one of those examples that, especially considering that this series endures, it's a really good example that you don't have to just use potty humor. I mean, they do a little bit in here and there, but you don't just have to use that to make kids laugh or entertained. You can also use really cool, like, wordplay and puns and, like, just utter ridiculousness. Yeah, not that there's, yeah, like I said, not that there's anything wrong with the other types, just I like they're also being examples of you can have playful, witty humor, not just like in your face obvious ones. Yeah, that's what I mean. Anyway, I really love doing a reread of the series and reading the one book that I had not read before. That was really great. Hilarious, has those little sentimental bits that draw real feeling out of you, or at least true real feeling out of me. And yeah, I love this series. I would recommend this to anyone who has kids. You want your kids to read a really like funny series. If you are an adult and you just want to revisit your childhood, do it, because this is great. Or if you are just looking for something, you know, kind of funny and wholesome and the world feels really terrible right now and you just want to feel nostalgia or something really good, maybe pick this up too. Yeah, I loved these books and I loved revisiting them, and you know, I'm doing my, well, still trying to do, I've been so highly like bad with keeping up on this year, but I started last year making a video that I wanted to make a one for each genre basically of my favorite books of all time. I kind of wanted to do like I had one on my favorite graphic novel, my favorite fantasy novel, and I did another one on my 3 favorite horror novels, and then I have my 3 more videos basically planned for my favorite classics, my favorite mysteries, and my favorite literary fiction / contemporary books, because that's kind of the breakdown of what my favorite novels of all time are by genre. But in the back of my mind, while I've been planning for those and trying to do rereads and annotations and stuff, in the back of my head I've had playing around with maybe also at the end of that making a video about my favorite series of all time, and just really go, maybe not in depth because that would be an extremely long video, but just kind of do an overview of what I count as my favorite series of all time, and they would have to be series that are finished to be counted basically at this point. But I think that this series, it would definitely be on there, because I found this every bit as enjoyable and hilarious at 35 that I did when I was first reading these books when I was probably like 8 or 9. So yeah, love it. So that was most of the books that I read. Now we can talk about the other book that I read, which was supposed to be scary but definitely wasn't. What book was that? Well, it was The Amityville Horror by Jay Anson. So this book, hilarious. Look, there's flies on it. Flies play a role. There's flies. Here, I'll show you the beginning of each chapter. There's the house. The house does not look like that anymore. They had way too many looky-loos, so not only did they change the outside of the house to no longer have those creepy eye-looking windows, they also have changed the address. Like, they completely changed it out entirely. However, it doesn't matter. We live in the age of the internet. You can look it up on Google and it will come up under a different address, but you can still find the house. Amityville Horror, in case you somehow have lived in the world and you have no fucking clue what I'm talking about. Insane if you consider the amount, this book, the experience, how many podcast episodes, movie adaptations, I think there's a couple of documentaries, the references in the second Conjuring movie. Basically following a horrific murder in 1974 of almost an entire family by one of their own. A year later, the house is going for fairly cheap for what the property actually is. It's in a very nice area. It has its own private boathouse and dock, access to the local river, decent sized property, decent house, all that good stuff. It's going for rather cheap, and that's because of the brutal murders, familial side that took place the year prior. The Lutz family actually manages to buy the property because they just need the room. The Lutzes are George and Kathy. George and Kathy are now together. Kathy has 3 children, 2 boys and a girl from a previous marriage, and yeah, this ready-made family is basically just trying to find a place of their own, basically, that has enough room for them and maybe some new beginnings type of deal. Instead, what they get are 28 days of absolute hell. Basically, it's 28 days of a lot of paranormal activity. They would like you to believe it's as scary as the actual movie Paranormal Activity, but I mean, I almost shit myself watching that movie, and this did not even make me feel chilled. Maybe it is the cynic in me, maybe it is the way it was written, which was something else. Maybe it was the fact that I have seen the recent adaptation with, what's his face, Ryan Reynolds, right? I've seen that recent adaptation. I haven't seen the original, but I've listened to a podcast summary of it. It's fairly true to the new one as far as I remember, and I've listened to countless podcast episodes that document, first of all, the horrific murders and also the subsequent experiences of the Lutz family. And I just, maybe I just don't find any of that creepy because I've been inundated by all of that information, but at the same time, it almost seems laughable. Like, they supposedly see a demon pig named Jody. It's a demon pig, it's huge, and it has red glowing eyes, and apparently it can hover outside of a second-story window. You also have the secret red room in the basement that, we don't know what that was used for. I mean, it's the 1970s. People like swingers and stuff like that. I mean, wouldn't somebody have a weird porn den or something in there? I mean, not that I know anything about not that I'm, like, making any assumptions about the DeFeo family, who are the original owners of the house. I have no idea. But they didn't build that house, I don't think. They just kind of bought it. It was owned by somebody else before that, so I'm saying that maybe the original owners had a weird swingers den or something in their basement. I don't know. It's the 70s. Hell if I know. Laughable. There were some buck wild shit in here too. I kind of talked about it a little bit in my like review that I posted on like Goodreads and Storygraph. I said, it's very readable and entertaining. Well, yes, it is very readable and entertaining. I got through this, I wouldn't say super duper quickly, because I was having this as my lunchtime read at work, but I did fly through this pretty well, and it is entertaining in a sense because it just completely ridiculous and unbelievable. And I'm saying this as someone who 100% believes that ghosts are real, and is, even if I'm not in full belief in aliens and other supernatural happenings, I'm at least fairly open to the idea that that is a strong possibility of their existence. But at the same time, I am highly skeptical, and even if I say that, yes, I believe ghosts exist, it's because I've had a couple of experiences of my own, and prior to those experiences, I assumed that maybe they were, but I wasn't 100% sure, and now I'm sure, but that doesn't mean that I believe every single ghost story that's out there. I think a lot of them can be easily explained by natural occurrences, things going on in the house, someone's own paranoia and hysteria. I think that, you know, there's a lot of explanations for things, and it's not always ghosts or you know, the Zach Baggins' favorite demons. I don't think that that's the case, you know, 8 times out of 10, the other 2 possibly. But it's so, oh man, I don't really want to get full into this because this video is going to be incredibly long if I spend the entire time just breaking down every instance of why this is ridiculous. I'll just go with, it's very entertaining. I wouldn't come into this thinking that you're gonna learn any great revelation about spooky things. I also said in my review that it's very readable and entertaining, but it's also a total crock of shit, because I 100% believe it's a total crock of shit, and in fact it's almost pretty much admitted by the Lutz family that they got drunk over a bottle of wine with Ronnie DeFeo's lawyer, and came up with this crazy ass story to make it look like his client is crazy, to get him out of jail or get him into a different situation anyway. Ronnie DeFeo is of course the perpetrator of the familicide of his own family. He killed his parents and his siblings, and then tried to blame the mob. The other problems that I basically have with this book are that, you know, other than it being, like I said, I think it's a total crock of shit. You can believe whatever you believe. If you think it's 100% true, that's your business. But yeah, I think it's kind of crap, but still rather entertaining. I didn't rate this very highly. Oh, I didn't even tell you what I rated the Benicular series. I think they were all 5s across the board, if I remember correctly. This book, however, I rated 2 stars. And I gave it 2 stars because it was entertaining. It probably would have gotten lower than that, really. But I did think that Jay Anson was at least fairly entertaining, knows how to build suspense a little bit. There's like a whole section with like this priest that was coming to the house to bless it, and then interspersed between like chapters and sections about the family and their dealings with everything, like smells of perfume, or George Lutz keeps waking up at like a certain time in the wee hours, which is apparently when the DeFeos were murdered, and the family dog's acting weird, the kids are fighting all the time, they're beating the shit out of their kids. The little girl, Missy, is befriending a demon pig that floats around, apparently. It's just all of this weird stuff interspersed with all of that is also catching up with this priest who tried to bless the house and then was told by something evil there to get out. And it's interspersed with his health and like psyche and everything going completely downhill, and just random stuff like that in between. I feel like that was just kind of put in to add an air of legitimacy, because I mean, this is like post The Exorcist, I believe. I think The Exorcist came out in what, the early 70s, right? You know, everybody's like, oh my god, even the Catholic priest can't handle it, holy shit, that's legit kind of a thing, probably. And yeah, all of that just, it makes it seem like it's crazier than it really is, and absolutely, you know, scary. I didn't find anything scary about this because I don't believe it's real. Maybe if I actually believed that some of this happened, that would scare me. What scares me more, to be completely honest, is one part of the investigation into this house where they actually caught a photograph of a small boy. It's all over the internet, so if you're curious, you can look it up. A photograph of a small boy poking his head out of a bedroom. I think that has been partially debunked, even though they insisted children were not there at the time of the investigation. There is the possibility that there was indeed a kid there, and they just, you know, this is for effect or whatever. It is still kind of creepy, because it's like, well, there were children murdered in this house. So that's just, that's eerie. Speaking of the murdered children, I think that's also part of this thing. There's like a lot of stuff involved with that case. It's very weird. They're saying like how the rest of the family have been taken out, all sleeping in bed, basically, laying on their stomachs. How would that have happened? And they not be like drugged. They didn't hear any gunshots. They didn't hear like, there's like a whole conspiracy thing. How did the neighbors not hear anything? Well, you know, it's also the 1970s. Nobody wants to hear anything. Mind your own. Well, that's like a whole thing. I don't have answers for that. You know, at the end of the day, I really don't. I wasn't there. I'm not a detective. I have no idea. But I don't think it's anything supernatural. I didn't really like some of the bits of them talking about that stuff. There's a lot of rumors that went around about the murdered DeFeo family. There's a lot of like rumors that can't exactly be perpetuated about the abusiveness of the senior DeFeo. I've heard people say 100% he was abusing his family. I hear other people say that's a bunch of bullshit. Ronnie is the problem. He was a spoiled kid. He had a lot of drug usage. He was going absolutely nuts, and that's why, part of why he killed his family. There's like a whole bunch of stuff. I don't know this family. I don't know anything about Amityville except for this terrible story. Like, so I really don't know. But yeah, a lot of the rumors, especially the ones that are really discussed in here for entertainment purposes, just kind of felt like really invasive to anyone who actually loved that family, their extended family members, their friends, their coworkers, their loved ones, their schoolmates. It just feels really kind of gross. You know, besides those rumors, there are also rumors that, like, well, you know, maybe Mrs. DeFeo was involved in somehow, maybe Ronnie's next youngest sibling, Dawn, was somehow involved, or she was partially, because that's something that Ronnie said in jail, is that, well, she was part of it, she helped me kill them, or that kind of whatever thing. I think he's a very sick man, if he's still living. I can't remember if he is at this point. Yeah, anyway, I think that's kind of yucky, is that is pulled in a lot. Different things like that are kind of pulled in a lot and discussed kind of for excuses, entertainment value, stuff like that. At the end of the day, and almost an entire family was murdered by one of their own, and that's really gross. And I think it's also sad that that kind of gets lost in the shuffle because of the Lutzes and their whatever the hell they experienced or thought they experienced at the house. You also have, at one point in this novel, an accusation of despicable treatment of ill people by a tribe that was actually specifically named. I'm not going to repeat it. First of all, because I don't want to give it names. Second of all, I don't even remember what was named anyway, but yeah, there was a big, strong accusation that the land is poisoned, that the house is on, and it's because that section was used to basically take mentally and physically ill members of their tribe and abandon them there to die, which is, first of all, completely and patently untrue. That is not a thing that happened. You can look it up yourself. It is not a thing that has happened. It is in no records anywhere. That is not the MO of this particular tribe. I don't think it's the MO of any tribe, actually. They cared for their own pretty well. And it's also just kind of, it's akin to that whole, well, it was buried on an ancient Indian burial ground thing. And it's like, okay, first of all, no. That's an old trope. That's a bunch of bullshit. Bunch of racist bullshit on top of it. And second of all, well then, idiot, maybe stop building things on top of dead bodies. Maybe have some fucking modicum of respect. Yeah, so that was something that I didn't like because that was like a rumor that was untrue and they used that as an excuse as to why things are happening. It's complete bullshit. And then at the end, the Warrens show up at the end of this book during the investigation, and of course Ed pulls his usual line of, well, everything's demonic, obviously you have a demonic infestation, blah 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 blah. Ed, you just like to beat a dead horse, don't you? I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about the Warrens. I feel like I could give an entire TED talk on how I feel about the Warrens. First of all, for thinking that they're a bunch of fucking grifters who took advantage of people who desperately needed their help. I think that they definitely, potentially have added to the satanic panic that this country went through in the 1980s. And I also just don't like how they have fucked with the scene of parapsychology and, again, turned it into just a crock of shit, instead of a field that should be at least somewhat respected of people trying to find answers that are beyond our ken. I will stop my rant about the Warrens there because I could go on for a while, and I'd rather not. So by the time they showed up in this book, even though I knew that they were going to, because again, I've done this song and dance before with this story, I've listened to the podcast, I have watched the Conjuring movies. I actually prefer the fictional version of the Warrens to the real ones, mostly probably due to how endearing Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga are. I hate the Warrens, think they sucked, and them showing up about made my eyes roll right up through the back of my head. It's like the cherry on top of an already craptastic cake that this book was, and I don't know. Again, what did I think that I was getting when I was reading this? Well, I already mostly didn't think that a lot of things were real. I thought maybe the family had something, maybe something they felt, because I mean, this was a place where, like I said, a bunch of horrific murders happen. So I was like, okay, well, I mean, maybe when they talk about smelling perfume or seeing a rocking chair move, hearing things like that, I mean, that's possible. In the grand scheme of things, people violently lost their lives in this house. It's possible. But when it's written so sensationally and there's so many other things pulled in, and it just, I think it's crap, you guys. Yeah, I think it's crap, and I think this book is, like I said, it's really entertaining, but it's just like, you can't believe a single goddamn word that's in this book. I think the only part of this novel that you can trust is factual is the beginning part where they're basically just describing what happened at the house when it belonged to the DeFeo family. Initial police report section of it. I think that's the only part that's actually factual. I'm sorry if this has offended any of you who actually believes the stuff that happened at the house. I'm a bit cynical for someone who, like I said, believes that ghosts are real. But I also have a really hard stance on people who I think are taking advantages of others, selling a story, grifting, basically. I have a pretty strong stance on grifting. So, yeah, maybe I felt a little bit some type of way about this book, but it was 2 stars. Yeah, it was everything I read in October. Partially enjoyable and partially not so much. Let me know what your thoughts are on these books. Again, I'm sorry if I have offended you for how angry I am about the Amityville Horror. But yeah, anyway, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.